All right, let's get started for today. Hello, and welcome to today's Forest Climate Lab. This series is presented by the Forest Climate Working Group. I'm Danielle Watson, the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Society of American Foresters, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the team at Michigan State University's Forest Carbon and Climate Program, Sandra Lupian, who's the interim director of the FCCP and the director of Mass Timber, will be assisting with Q&A following the presentations. You can see we've enabled the Q&A below, so feel free to add your questions at any time in that section and we'll get to them at the end. I'm so excited for today's conversation on wildfire and honored to have such an outstanding lineup of speakers. But before we dive in, I'm going to give a brief introduction of the Forest Climate Working Group. Next slide. Since 2007, the Forest Climate Working Group, or FCWG, as you might hear it called, has worked to unite the forest sector and provide innovative, science-informed strategies to leverage forests and forest products as a natural climate solution. FCWG is the largest and most diverse U.S. forest sector coalition advancing climate solutions. Next slide. Our informed and balanced perspective comes from our diverse membership organizations who together represent every corner of the forest sector. From a broad range of nonprofits to organizations representing forest scientists and practitioners, private forest landowners, state foresters, forest products, and carbon finance, our members believe that keeping forests as forests is the foundation to all forest climate solutions, and that helping forests adapt to climate change and become more resilient is an important complement to actions designed to sequester and store carbon. Next slide. So whether you're looking for more information on forests and carbon or want to support our efforts, please keep the Forest Climate Working Group in mind and view FCWG and its members as a resource. Now, without further ado, I'm happy to present Dr. John Bailey as our first speaker.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks to everyone joining. It was a great opportunity to share a little information with you today and engage in this dialogue. Let's get started right with the first slide, if we would. And this is a picture from the Holiday Farm fire in one of our research plots, a control area where that fire burned through. So maybe there is a little bit of silver lining to it, but this was one of 5 fires back in 2020 during Labor Day that smoked us out in Corvallis, actually put a layer of ash in my yard here. So you're not going to get a lot of sympathy from me today, those of you in Washington, D.C. and New York, that you had a little bit of Canadian smoke for a little while. This is something that the West has been living with for a long time. And part of my message today that it's really a legacy of some of our campaigns in the past, including Smokey Bear, who I love, but how we're gonna have to tune up that message a little bit. Next slide, please. Let's look at the trends that we have. You know, you can pull this kind of information from the National Interagency Fire Center to look at this recent increase. I like it because it spans my career when I started as a firefighter in 1983. Lots of increases in acreages. So looking at the upper left there, acreages, dollars spent, the impacts, the number of research projects, the time it spends in the news. You guys know the whole routine for how this has been building over the last few decades. But we really need to look at the lower chart as well that spans this period of my career, and a relatively minor increase relative to the decrease during the real active fire suppression years, what I call the Bambi years, where we really viewed fire as, you know, got to suppress it, it's evil, all that kind of stuff. We also had the benefit of a favorable climatic period for that. But even that decline and how important it is relative to a decline from centuries ago, where we were burning an order of magnitude larger acres. And that reflects how extensive the landscape is that burned and evolved with fire, how much burning was happening, and therefore how much this landscape grows. And because we're growing fuel every day. Again, part of my message today. Next slide, please. So we're going to start right at the basis of the fire behavior triangle because it has this fuel component in terms of the amount that's accumulating all the time. And we can get into details about living and dead and arrangements and fuel models, just not that important for today. Weather is another side of the fire behavior triangle that drives these patterns that we've been seeing over decades or centuries for just explaining what's been happening and going on with fire ecology. And then topography modifies fire behavior as well, and how they all interact. Next slide. Because the story is we have more and more fuels, and these dry, anytime you start accumulating fine fuels, and they're nice and dry and they're abundant and contiguous, many of our acres have more fuel on them than they've ever had. We've created fuel conditions and structural types that haven't existed since the last ice age. So we've created those. And they're more contiguous than they've ever been. And that might even be more scary than acre by acre, hectare by hectare, how much fuel there is it's just all contiguous now. And so that makes for very contiguous fires. Of course, as humidity goes down, heat goes up, as you create more atmospheric moisture stress, as you increase slope, those are all the things that really drive increased fire behavior. And conversely, all the things that can reduce fire behavior. And we know that in analyzing wildfire, we know that in any kind of suppression activities we want, and we know that as prescribed burners as well. And we use this information from the fire behavior triangle and these trends, the great science, the great models that we have that can really inform us about fire behavior, minimize the number of surprises that we have. Next slide. And so we can kind of summarize this trend that fuels have been growing and grow and will continue to grow. And they're actually growing faster with increased CO2 and warmth. We've got more and more humans out there building more and more houses, starting more and more ignitions, being impacted more and more by fire. And the fire seasons themselves are hotter, longer, drier. These are three pretty consistent upward trends. Whereas the treatment acres, despite our best efforts, decades of trying to increase the pace and scale and all the science and all the models, it's been pretty flat. And so that's what's driving these issues, puts us in the news, puts us into the policy debate. Another way to visualize it would be the next slide. And kind of look at historically, over the course of a fire season, more and more fuel becomes available as things, dry down, regardless of the timing of those fire seasons. And back east, there's a spring and a fall fire season, so that triangle would happen twice. But basically, more and more fuel becomes available through the course of a fire season, and the burning conditions tend to ramp up and then ramp down towards the end of the fire season. And so historically, there was a little bit of overlap that always drove the fire, tended to drive lower and mixed severity fire. Our current conditions, we've just created a lot more overlap. There's a lot more fuel. That's a bigger triangle. And as I said, fire seasons have already gotten longer. And as we look to the future, I'm not a prophet here. I'm just looking at those trends. The probabilities are going to catch up with us, not necessarily every year, but it's pretty clear that overlap between fuel availability and fire seasons is also going to continue to get larger. So brace yourself. There's more and more of this coming. How are we going to get out of it? That would be the next slide. Certainly, there's some focus moving forward for making our human settlements more fire adapted, fire resilient, parts of it even fire resistant, as we think about our houses, our neighborhoods, our entire communities, our towns, what we're going to do individually, what we're going to do as groups, what we're going to do with building codes, what we're going to do with new policies and grant programs. Not everybody, there's a social equity side of this. Not everybody has the resources to do the things that are on this list. But we're all in this together. We tend to stand and fall as entire blocks, if not entire communities, when we faced wildfire, coming into it, one of these really hot, dry, windy days and a big ignition going and all the embers in the air and all that kind of stuff. We stand or fall together. And so this is going to be a comprehensive program, and it's part of the National Cohesive Strategy that we're going to talk about today. But with my last slide, I'm going to finish up with an eye to the forest. I'm a forester. I love trees. I love forests. Got a long track record with it. And I really want to stress today this concept of there's a huge difference between when you have low severity fire and when we have this increasing number of large fires with large acreages that burn, stand replacing high severity kind of fire. And so if you look, and this is my allocation of carbon out there, and about half is above ground and about half is below ground, and some is dead and some is living. The immediate impacts for low versus high severity fire, that first year kind of column isn't real big. Yeah, a bunch of the carbon is put right back into the atmosphere, the blue bar, but mainly a whole lot of it is killed, and that has the implication over decades as that dead carbon is now on a completely different trajectory than the living carbon. And so by the time you get several decades out and you're tracking these carbon pools, that difference is about twofold. A high severity burned area is only going to have about half the carbon that a fire that has been resistant and has responded to a low mixed severity fire. Green trees are left, the ecosystem is left intact. So we have all the benefits of recreation and scenery and watershed protection and timber supply and carbon storage and wildlife habitat, everything that we love about forests and the things that forests are. We have to remember there are also fuels. But we can regulate to a certain degree the intensity with which they're going to burn and therefore the severity that it's going to have for us. That's my message for today, and I'll hand it off to our next speaker.
Thanks so much, John. And yes, our next speaker is Mike Zupko.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, John. And that was a great overview and understanding of kind of the situation that we're in, why we're seeing more wildfires, the challenges that we have. I'm going to talk about some national strategies for addressing wildfire risk. What I wanted to add, but I didn't want my slide to have too many words, was also and building climate resiliency. So I'm going to talk at a pretty high level, kind of a 60,000 foot level, some things nationally that we're doing. Talk a little bit about the organization that I represent, the Wildland Fire Leadership Council. Talk about our interrelationship with a couple of different groups that work at the national level. As John referenced, go into the cohesive strategy. It's been around for about 15 years now. We did a recent addendum update here in the past several months, talk about some of those pieces and the importance of those and the opportunities to leverage those at a variety of levels, and then hit on a couple other things just real quickly that are going on for awareness. Excuse me. So WFLC, Wildland Fire Leadership Council, as we call it. Sorry, next slide. I was moving my slides and not those. Operates under an MOU from the Secretaries of Agriculture, Interior, Homeland Security, and Defense. We look at the efficient and effective implementation of federal wildland fire policies and national policies that hit all partners in this space: federal government, state government, local government, tribal nations, partners, etc., and look at how can we be most efficiently working through those issues and those challenges and building towards this resilience. I'm not going to go into the details of some of the specifics of the need and the challenges. John did an excellent job in really capturing that. Next slide. But real quickly on the background of WFLC. Sorry, that one went too far. Thank you. We have 19 members, 12 federal, seven non-federal. Again, leadership at the state level, leadership at the federal level. We have political appointees. We have governors, county officials, county commissioners, state foresters, and we foster these policies that are out there. We've been around since 2002. So for those that have some history or have heard the term National Fire Plan, that was a 2001 construct of which WFLC was somewhat born out of, looking at those things. Things change over time, needs change. And as John described, even in the past 2 decades or 2.5 decades, the landscape has changed and the challenges that we have with severity of fires have changed. Next slide. One of the groups that I did want to hit on, and Bill Tripp, who's going to speak next, is a member, but many folks are probably aware or have heard of the recently constructed Congressional Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission. Stemmed out of the bipartisan infrastructure law, was tasked with some very specific things, but also some breadth of issues. There are 50 members, about a third are federal agency representatives, 2/3 are non-federal representatives from a wide variety of sectors. And they were challenged ultimately with 2 reports. One, and you can go to the next slide, specific to aviation, and then the full commission report, which the simple way of saying it is everything else that touches wildland fire, workforce management, budget, appropriations, et cetera, landscape. So the next slide shows at least how that group has been put together in their work group topics. There are a few other, I don't say subsidiary, but additional topics to this, but this gives you an idea of the breadth of what that group is working towards. They are working towards a report as required by the law that's due here in about, well, the middle of September. And they are, I believe, on schedule for that. Bill can correct me if I'm wrong, but they are on schedule for that. And then the opportunity to engage over the following 180 days with those members, with Congress and others to help do a little deeper dive into what those challenges and needs are. But I'm not a member, but do participate as a subject matter expert. And I think it's important that folks know that this is moving forward. There's going to be a lot of great ideas coming through that process. And it'll be out soon that we can utilize to rally behind. Next slide. So to dive into the cohesive strategy, it's the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. It stemmed out of legislation in 2009 called the Flame Act. I won't go into the specifics there, but basically Congress charged us, the wildfire community, with building this national strategy. It was very thoughtfully, deliberatively, and cohesively done. And because of that, it took several years to do. But when the final version was published in 2014, it really had been, it wasn't just a document that came out, but it had been a rallying point for a lot of different groups. And I'd say at that time, a lot of new groups that weren't necessarily in some of those conversations. I'm going to talk about the update here in a second that we worked on over the past year, but you can almost say the same thing now. 10 years later, there's a lot of new groups at the table that probably didn't even exist or weren't in this space back then, and it's an exciting time. Next page. It really is a strategy, but where some folks look at it and kind of pose a question, it's a strategy built intentionally for multiple levels. If you work at the national level, if you're working in Congress, if you're working at a Washington office, federal agency, or even organization, it's built to where you can utilize pieces of it at your level. But it also has a lot of components to where if you're at a regional level, state level, and especially at a local level with some of the management options in there, it helps you think through things and ways in which you can engage your partners and others at your level and how to move these things forward. So I'm not going to read the points that's on the slide. You can do that, and hopefully you're doing that while I'm talking, but it really has some assumptions in it to help you build that strategy at whatever level you operate. Next slide. I mentioned that the original cohesive strategy was completed in 2014. We've continued to utilize it and rally around it, but Wildland Fire Leadership Council agreed over a year ago that the strategy is still sound. It is still the foundation, and we have groups across the country that are utilizing it in a variety of different ways. So we didn't want to, quote, redo the strategy. What we wanted to do was to addend it, add to it, and build out and looking at where we are now. Next slide. So what we did was, this vision statement is very similar to the original vision statement, but we made some minor tweaks. Well, I say minor tweaks. We made what may look like minor tweaks, but actually have had some good impact. One of the things we did is we changed some language to add "and collectively." The terminology we had before wasn't as inclusive as it could be, but collectively, just that term alone, everybody feels like they have or should have a part of this. And we also inserted the words "learning to" in front of "live." Again, relatively simple, but before we said "live with wildland fire," which is still relevant, but learning to live, it's a continual process. And as John described, things continue to change. So we need to continue, we need to be moving with that. Next slide. The 3 goals have remained the same. Again, they're very solid, sound, A lot of groups rally around these. Science is at the center of it, which is an important piece of this. And that's where we spent a lot of time back in the original construction using science and research to inform this. But what we did do with the first two goals is add some additional language. And I highlighted climate change. I know our talk today is focused somewhat on that, so I wanted to make sure you saw that. That was not included in the original language. But again, the three goals are the same. Next slide. What we have here are what we call 4 critical emphasis areas. These are things, again, that we didn't address as directly in the 2014 foundational piece, but are now. Climate change, I don't need to go into too much detail here, but we have the impacts that is having, again, as John has described, are much more or being seen more or better understood now. Workforce is a huge issue, is a huge challenge at a variety of levels, not just capacity, but health and well-being, how we work with the folks that work with us, make sure they're treated well, especially those that are out in the woods, not just fighting fire, but dealing with resiliency, working on resiliency issues, prescribed fire, working with communities pre and post fire. It's a stressful job in all those capacities. Community resiliency continues to be an area that we want to make sure communities are engaged in, obviously. And then diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental justice, recognizing that those are 2 separate things, but grouping them together because they actually transcend everything we look at. Next slide. Well, you saw the highlighted climate change. You don't need to go back, but I just wanted to make that note that climate change transcends many of these as well. The 5 issues that we have here are implementation challenges. I'm not going to go through each one, but these are areas that I say are trends that we've not just picked up on when we started this process, but have really highlighted and are describing the need to go in further. I will just mention the first one. When we talk about the wildfire management system, we're not just talking about the wildfire response, not just the firefighters that are out fighting the fire and dealing with the smoke. It's the entire system. It's those that work in communities and with communities. It's those that work on the resiliency and land management issues. So these 5 implementation challenges are rallying points, and we're beginning to structure some different groups to help move these forward. And next slide. Last thing I'll mention around the cohesive strategy and the addendum is a very concerted effort to not just say, okay, we have an addendum, go forth everyone and do good, but to be thoughtful in how this actually integrates with existing programs and areas in which they're working. So to be able to do that, we're being thoughtful. We're approaching groups where they are. We're helping them understand with some tweaks to some programmatic things that they have, or some agency programs. You might be able to further embrace and leverage the cohesive strategy of that. So that's something that's more on WFLIC to help facilitate. I'm going to click through these next slides pretty quick, but I did want to make sure folks were aware. So next slide. One of the things that we're facilitating right now through WFLIC is what we're calling an all-hand wildfire resilience framework. This is intended to look at national and scale. There's a lot of different frameworks that are being built or have been built. I'm going to reference a couple that both the Forest Service and DOI are working on right now, which are a piece of this. But what we're trying to do is bring together the variety of different partners working in the space to build wildfire resilience and make sure these things are interconnected. It's not a top level of governance. It's not a, we're going to make decisions, but it's an understanding that there are a lot of different ways to approach this, and there's a lot of really good things going on. So how can we leverage all those? So just a highlight here that we're all working towards this all hands wildfire resilience framework. Next thing I just wanted to mention as a note is the recent construction or development of what they're calling a wildfire resilience coalition. This is a group of partners coming together willingly to talk through these issues, but to also find synergy and speaking with one voice. I just came off a call that they're having, and they were talking through some of the issues that they may be approaching, be it Congress or some other national bodies going forward. And WFLIC, I just submit a liaison to that body and just kind of helping share insights. And then the last couple of things I'll mention, next slide, are the Forest Service 10-year wildfire crisis strategy, the DOI Interior's 5-year strategy, and then some work that, say, DOD is doing around building a cohesive wildfire strategy within Department of Defense. Of course, FEMA is doing a lot of things too. So there's a lot out there. WIFLIC space is to help coordinate and leverage a lot of these things and help build awareness. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Tripp, who's going to be able to take some of this and really drill down into how a local level they've been able to facilitate and use this. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. Bill, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, click to the first photo, please. So my name is Bill Tripp. I'm the Director of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy for the Karuk Tribe's Department of Natural Resources. I serve as co-chair of the Western Region Strategy Committee for the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy and tribal government representative on President Biden's Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, as well as participate in numerous other local, regional, and national networks. I'm speaking to you today a little bit about what implementation looks like. I have worked in the field of natural resources for the past 30 years and started building my experience as a cultural fire practitioner at the age of 4 years old. It is a great pleasure to have the opportunity to convey some of this experience to you here today. Can you click to the next photo, please? Indigenous knowledge, practice, and belief systems employed on a landscape for millennia once operated on timelines significant to evolutionary adaptation for many species, including many currently in significant decline. This is Poof Poof, or Pacific giant salamander. He is a sacred water purifier in Karuk culture. Paying attention to this creature as a focal species can help us to understand how we can work with the land to help him manage the water cycle. There are many lessons we can learn by re-engaging indigenous cultures into a new era of co-stewardship, co-management, and shared decision-making. Next photo, please. We once worked shoulder to shoulder and as represented in this basket design, meaning friendship or people side by side. We will have to work closely together again if we're going to achieve the scope and scale of action that will be needed on the ground as we progress further into the 21st century. Lightning will not stop, but storms are starting to intensify and conditions are becoming more prone to fire occurrence in places that may not have been at high risk historically. Next photo. Cultural ignitions burned differently and achieved a complex patchwork of short interval burns. This graphic represents one of the seasonal differences in burn timing we're going to have to employ in different vegetative conditions. By burning under black oak overstory in late winter, fuel is reduced when it comes time to burn the adjacent grass in late June. Many benefits are achieved in compartmentalizing burn timing. In addition to increased safety, flowers in the meadow provide the pollen for the bumblebees that are rearing their young under the leaves remaining under the oak trees through the spring months. Reproduction and population capacity is enhanced instead of negatively impacted. Next photo. It is not realized by many that in fire resilient conditions, a few people can burn 20 acres a day near where people live. This occurred historically in 120 villages throughout the 1 million acre Karuk territorial landscape. Through 3 14-day periods per year, this scale of burning can accomplish over 100,000 acres, or about 10% of the landscape per year. Couple that with high country, ceremonial, and other burning practices, and lightning ignitions cannot possibly burn at the scale and intensity they do today. Next photo. Restoring and maintaining landscape resiliency can take overly dense forests and neglected grasslands and shrublands and turn them into productive environments teeming with life. This will take time. Historically, sugar pine snags produced a form of black pitch used as an ignition source. Managing to ensure an adequate supply of black pitch for the next 7 generations in perpetuity is an endeavor that takes hundreds of years to implement. We should make no mistake that success will be a multi-generational process that will require us to establish some permanence to appropriate action, or we will be doomed to failure. Next photo. Fire has now become problematic. The Slater fire in 2020, for example, burned over 100,000 acres in one burn period in less than 12 hours. The primary Kuduk village in the Happy Camp area is called Athifu Wunupma, or place where Hazel Creek flows through. This indigenous traditional ecological knowledge indicates that there was once a lot of healthy hazel to make baskets out of and to provide nuts for food. The best hazel comes from black oak stands, which grow on slopes where the sun shines most intensely, in some of the driest, most fire-prone places. Excluding fire from this kind of environment sets the stage for disastrous consequences. Next slide. Fires like these produce smoke that like most cannot even begin to imagine. Fire exclusion and many other factors being exacerbated by climate change is driving us further into ecological departure and taking life. Current conditions require human intervention, or they can get stuck in a perpetual state of disrepair. Next photo. Many traditional food, fiber, and medicinal resources are fire dependent, and in some cases, smoke dependent as well. Take salmon, for example. Light smoke inputs can lower water temperatures to enhance conditions through transition seasons in a manner conducive of healthy and abundant populations, thereby improving access for human use. Next slide. Elevation, slope, aspect, soils, moisture gradients, vegetative community, human uses, species diversity, and treatment timing are all critical to achieving socio-ecological resilience. Next. These human-fire relationships are vital to species diversity, survivability, health and abundance, not to mention cultural identity relevant to local environments. Many times, our regulatory practices limit our ability to enact solutions. Doing right for people and nature is the key to building trust and progressing shared values. Next. There are many conversations working to affect change. The Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, for example, helps to enable progress on the ground with seed monies, storytelling, and engagement in policy discussions. Expanding such efforts will help to demonstrate that we can successfully turn global problems into local solutions. Next. The Western Klamath Restoration Partnership is one of many efforts serving as an example that helps us get to landscape restoration and maintenance with communities that are truly fire adapted. You can find a wealth of information on this partnership at wkrp.network. Next. This partnership uses technological advancements to inform and carry out productive treatment work or proactive treatment work while preserving indigenous knowledge and data sovereignty. Next. It gets to scales that can proactively address our current wildfire crisis. Next. It improves safety and effectiveness in employing a full suite of wildfire response strategies and tactics that work to restore historic fire regimes. Next. And it guides us in our vision to safely, effectively extinguish fire when needed, use fire where allowable, manage our natural resources, and collectively learn to live with wildland fire. Next. So humans can once again achieve fire-adapted cultures with well-intended meaning and purpose, with well-paying jobs and affordable homes in our homelands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And finally, our last speaker, Dr. Heidi Huber-Stearns. Take it away.
Awesome, thank you. And thanks everyone for being here and the opportunity to talk about this a bit. And it's an honor to be here with John, Bill, and Mike. And also they've touched on a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about. So I'll move fairly quickly through these slides. I will say I made these on a tablet, so I might win the award for the most bland slides you've seen. But if you can go to the next slide, we'll just dive right in. So I want to just start by mentioning, I think it's pretty obvious from a lot of what we talked about here, there's a range of different ways that we can think about protecting communities, reducing hazardous fuels, dealing with climate change, all of those things. And so our focus today is on the federal level policy scale, but I want to just note that there's a lot of state and local level work that's, excuse me, key to navigating how we deal with smoke and wildfire. And as Bill was talking about, co-managing wildfire and the role of tribes in that work as well. So a lot of the state and local government work is critical. So we're talking about federal level support and the incentives, financing, and other structures that are in place at the federal level play out in who and how can help navigate policy work at the local level. So, similar to what John was talking about, there's no one strategy to dealing with or solving the smoke or wildfire issues that we're dealing with. This is about living with impacts from fire, even if you're removed in space and time. So we're dealing with smoke from fires hundreds of miles away, or poor drinking water quality, or flooding damage to property and people when the rainy season begins after an upstream wildfire. We're talking about a series of events that we have dealt with for quite a while in the West. We know the East is starting to experience that as well. And so thinking about a series of strategies, policies, and other things that are flexible for different places and time, like Mike was talking about as well, and the elements there are key. So this is a bit of a spaghetti bowl when you start digging into what some of the actual policy solutions might be for different elements of this, but I'm going to touch on a few. Next slide, please. And just a couple things to consider, I think, in the policy work that I do in my work. I think and with partners, some of the things that we think about is number one, just the role of community and organization capacity. We talk about capacity pretty broadly as a variety of things, but being really intentional here and thinking about the fact that we need capacity for multiple factors to get this work done. It's not just about funding. It's about the ability to adapt, collaborate, the motivation to do this work locally, the local interest, how the collective problem solving is taking place. All of those things that are going to impact both communities of place and communities of practice, and their availability for being able to use resources. So maybe a very brief example of this, we've seen some work around funding prescribed fire equipment is not enough when it's tied into other fund sources around labor and other things. So this type of resource capacity needs to be separated from other funding, able to have full and flexible ways of purchasing equipment. It's not tied up in a government for labor. So quick example, but this idea of how things are bundled and packaged is important. Local resources and expertise are key here. There's a crucial and unmet need for effective implementation of different programs, federal funding and programs at the local level, and a lot of that work is enacted by community-based entities and partnerships. And just a couple of things that I'll mention, Bill, well, so I won't spend a lot of the role of traditional ecological knowledge, tribal burning, and other practices that are vital in this space. And then the last consideration here is just because certain federal programs or policies exist does not mean that the programs are accessible. The organizations have the capacity to apply, and often some of the limitations for programs and accessibility of that are unknown at first. And so just something to keep in mind here. So I'm going to dig into just a couple examples on the next slide by starting, continuing the thread that Mike and Bill talked quite a bit about around workforce. So I'm going to mention two things in particular. A lot of the work that we see being done in our forests is being done, particularly the labor-intensive forestry work is actually being conducted by H-2B guest workers because those are positions that they're unable to fill domestically. And so some of the workforce pieces that we talk about are not just about firefighters and suppression, it's about this much broader understanding of the workforce pipelines, who's conducting prescribed burning, who's contracting with the Forest Service to do work, who's doing work on their own lands. And so two things to mention here, there's a bipartisan Wildland Firefighter Paycheck Protection Act. And all of the things that I mentioned, I'm happy to connect people with colleagues of mine that are working on these. So I'm just mentioning them here to say, here's what's happening. Happy to make more detailed connections. So this is once known as the TIMS Act, and it was part of the IIJA funding that was supposed to permanently raise pay and other benefits for wildland firefighters, but some of those temporary increases are set to expire. And so that's one component we see here. And then the other is that the Northwest Forest Workers Center, as well as the Rural Coalition, are working on language for the 2023 Farm Bill that would provide better protections for forest workers. And so that's specifically for workers on public and private lands, including improved working conditions, more transparent contracting processes at a safer pace, and better information access in multiple languages, as well as the type of information workers receive and when, as well as protections and trainings around safe use and maintenance of chainsaws for forestry workers. And then I'll also just flag that the National Interagency Prescribed Fire Training Center and the Forest Service Fields Academy have some curriculum that can develop prescribed fire expertise. And we've seen in the recent Forest Service Prescribed Fire Resource Mobilization Strategy that there's a focus on scaling up that work. Next slide, please. And I'm not going to go through these in great detail. I'm happy to share links for some of this, but I will just flag that the Farm Bill overall is an area that is ripe with opportunities for engagement on different aspects of the wildfire and smoke challenges that we face. This is a list of priorities from the Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition, which is focused on, in this case, they're focused on opportunities for community-based and collaborative capacity. And you'll see things in here such as reauthorizing Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Project and the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, two really critical cross-boundary large landscape scale fire risk reduction and other forestry related programs that we have, as well as increasing the utility of tribal co-management authorities, and also things that are very functional as far as expanding match flexibility and how partners are able to engage. That ties back to these earlier points around local capacity and the ability for others to access the funds and agreements to be able to do this work. And so I think I will leave the rest of those, happy to follow up on that, but just the point here being, we're seeing things that are being recommended through the Farm Bill that are large scale, as far as how we're doing work across large landscapes, as well as really in the weeds of how do we structure these agreements and programs so that they actually work for people working on the ground. Next slide, please. And then just briefly, some other landscape level forest restoration, some other things that are going on in this space. There's the Emergency Wildfire Act of 2023. The purpose of this title is to increase the pace and scale of forest restoration and land management programs across the national forest system. And so that includes things like authorizing a pilot program with conservation finance agreement authorities, encouraging project planning and analysis to scale up the scale of work to the landscape level of 100,000 acres or more, as well as several other things around tribal, coordinating with tribal entities, local, federal, and state entities to support pilot programs, and doing some other work around requiring ecological standards for landscape projects. There's also the National Prescribed Act, something that some groups and others that I'm happy to connect folks with have proposed revisions to if it were to go forward. So propose some revisions to requirements for plans to increase prescribed fire, more inclusive workforce descriptions, training in there, as well as improved performance measures to increase accountability for fire, cultural burning, and air hazard reduction. So other things that are in the works in different stages. And next slide, please. I realize I'm moving through these quickly, but just to give you a sense of the different things that are out there in motion. We can't have this conversation without talking about smoke. So I will just mention the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA's proposed rule to modify what's called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or the NAAQS, for fine particle pollution, PM 2.5. There are some potential unintended consequences of this rule. It's a hard balance between protecting public health, but also the necessary efforts that we need to take in this space to increase the use of prescribed fire, cultural burning, and wildfire managed for natural resource benefits. There's concern that this proposed rule it does two things, essentially. The short version, one is it treats fires as exceptional events. That is no longer the case. They're the rule, not the exception, in a lot of the forests that we all work and live in. And then the second is the severity of the fire. one of the things that helps deal with severe fires is the use of prescribed burning and cultural burning. So if we reduce the ability to use those things from an air quality perspective, we're actually going to be exacerbating the issue on dealing with the severity of fire when there are smoke events, as we've all seen. So short version here is we don't really have control over having smoke or not. It's about when and how. And so there's some work in progress around providing some comments to the EPA and some other work to try to consider some of these things in how the EPA is thinking about the Clean Air Act and this space. All right. So short version here is to say starting somewhere is a lot of what we talk about with our partners in the policy space. There are a lot of different avenues to consider here as far as where and how you can conduct your work and where it might be useful for your constituents, whoever you represent and work with to engage. So just flagging all that to say, there's a lot going on in this space. It's complicated, but all of these different facets of wildfire policy do need champions. They tie to a lot of other things that we're trying to do broadly across our country as far as the work that we're doing in improving worker pay, job quality, et cetera. So all of this to say, happy to follow up with folks about this. The last slide has a couple of resources on it, but I definitely have several more partners that I'm happy to connect people with if you have specific questions about this. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heidi. That was a great overview. Okay, we're going to dive right into Q&A. I'm going to take a quick moderator privilege and start off with maybe something to get us all grounded. We've all used the R words a lot. So the resilience and restoration. And so I'm just wondering if any of you want to touch on a little bit of what that means on the ground. Go ahead, John.
Oh, as the professor, I always love these kinds of questions and that kind of stuff. Resilience is just a smaller scale, time stamp and spatial scale in the concept of building something in the ecosystem, the structure, the composition, everything that's going on that will withstand the impact of some disturbance, like wildfire. So something that stands there, takes it, survives, persists. And so for forest, we're really talking about creating structures, individual trees, collections of trees, stands, and all that kind of stuff, where most of the trees will survive when a wildfire comes through. But the same would apply to a hurricane or that kind of thing. Resistance, much bigger scale concept in terms of space and time, which factors in some of this resistant component, but then for any of the disturbance that actually plays out, including full stand replacement, that the ecosystem as a whole has a chance to respond and redevelop within a meaningful human time scale. I mean, following even stand replacing fire, most of these areas will be forest. Again, it might just take centuries. But if we can build in more resistance and resilience and have a fair number of trees that survive, then the long-term, large-scale resilience also goes way up, and it functions as a forest again on a much larger scale. Is that good, Danielle?
Great. Anybody else want to chime in?
I'll just add to that, and John, you did an excellent job of giving a very technical definition in a more sensible way. I mean, it's still very technical, but that was great. Two things I wanted to add is, one, resilience can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and I'll say, and that's okay, as long as when you're coming together with a diverse group, you collectively define resilience. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in the space to say it can mean some slightly different things. There are some very technical definitions, but make sure when you're discussing it, you know what you're saying as a collective. The second thing I'll add, and I alluded to it, we're primarily talking about landscape resilience or resilience of the land, but there's also community resilience in this space and building communities, homes, and others that are resilient. As I talked about, as we've all kind of mentioned, this learning to live with wildfire plays out in a lot of different locations, and the built environment is one that we're learning, maybe, or we know, there's certain things that you construct a house with, or there's certain ways you build a community that you can build them to where they can too be more resilient, because fire will be there. So just throwing the community resilience piece out there as well.
Thank you, Mike.
I'd like to add a little bit on the restoration piece, is that was kind of missed, is the, you know, a lot of people look at restoration, at restoring something to a static state. And the fact of the matter is ecosystems are dynamic. And so we may not be looking at, you know, restoration actions as something that is, you know, trying to achieve a static state, but rather achieving resilient conditions. And the other part of that is that, you know, that there are practices that have been employed on the landscape for millennia that we should probably be looking to restore as well, you know, like cultural burning, which, you know, can take the form of prescribed fire and other things, I imagine, but the human use of fire on the landscape is one of those things that we really need to restore.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bill.
Danielle, I'm starting to see some good questions here in Q&A. Shall I throw one out?
Yes, do it.
All right, I'm going to combine two questions because I think they're related. The first is a request to speak a little bit about the availability of kind of reliable carbon modeling data to help us understand how to address fire and the fire and climate change connection. And then that kind of modeling data would certainly underpin carbon credits and carbon markets. So somebody wants to hear about how can funds from carbon credit markets expand and accelerate forest management to reduce wildfire risk. So carbon modeling and how do carbon credit funds help here?
I started an answer, for the kind of market response, but with caveat, I'm not an economist. But as I have watched things over my career, and the influence of various wood markets, it's very much a global marketplace. And forest management practices always respond to that marketplace and at different scales. And so I have seen, the analyses that with a carbon market, with some money to be made for, managing the carbon on your land, that private landowners, at least many of them will respond to that economic incentive. This probably is more Heidi's area for kind of percentages and what the track records have been. But I have faith that there would be incentives there. But I did work in the caveat that doesn't mean no cutting, hands off. We're just going to let it grow because as history has shown, as we just let it go, we're also typically letting it burn. And that has some real implications for the amount of carbon that you're going to have there, how the marketplace is going to evaluate carbon that you lose as it shifts from living pools to dead pools, and that trajectory changes as in that slide that I had. For landowners that are interested in that carbon market, they're going to need to look at the fine print on how much they have to maintain on their land to continue receiving those credits, and what the implications would be of stand replacing fire versus less intense disturbances.
I'll just, and Heidi, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I'm not an economist, so I think I covered it well. So nothing to add there.
I was just going to add two data points. Again, I'm not in the space largely either, but one, folks will probably recognize that California has done the most work in this space. Whether you agree with the model or information that they're using, there's a wealth of information if you do some searches around California carbon credit, et cetera. The second thing I'll mention, and John hit on it, the private lands side of things. The National Alliance of Forest Owners, which represents private landowners, has done a pretty significant project. I'm looking at their website, forestcarbondataviz.org. If somebody wants to throw that in the whatever chat or whatever that is, it's a story model thing, but it's built from some pretty solid forest inventory and analysis data that the Forest Service produced, so some FIA data. So there's some really good nuggets in there. Again, a different viewpoint, but a space to where folks could go and look at and find a little more information on it.
And I haven't really got too deep into this space other than observing from the outside what's going on. But it seems that there are a couple of things missing. Is this whole idea of carbon generating, carbon pool management or whatever you want to call it, generating revenue, is not something that has really hit the federal space as far as National Forest System lands, other federal lands. There's a lot of reason for that, but I think there are some innovations we can probably be thinking about for the future, in that if you are actually doing all the pieces that are going to keep us from hitting a complete atmospheric release through these huge large severity fires, is maybe we can generate some revenues that can build and establish regenerative economic systems like endowment funds to perpetuate activities in communities and things like that. Whether or not you have to use conservation finance as a bridge to that, and use maybe timber receipts as a way to pay things back, or whatever that is. I think there are options for innovation in this space.
Thank you, everyone, for those great answers, and thanks for the questions. Keep rolling in. We do have one about sort of speaking to, maybe this is for Heidi or Bill, to speak to improvements on recruitment, incentives like family wage pay, benefits, permanent employment status, and the accessibility of jobs in sort of like the wildland fire management realm, if you have thoughts on improving that realm.
I'll give a quick response, and I'm sure Bill has a lot more great things to say about this. I would say a couple of the things that we know about are a couple of the policies that I mentioned that are trying to improve some of this. Part of it is just even getting a handle on who does what work in the workforce and who those people are. So there's some research going on around trying to understand that. We also see multiple pipelines for accessing this information, new training programs, groups like in California, the Forest Recruitment and Training Program that is training previously incarcerated folks to conduct prescribed burning and other work. So we're seeing some changes in the pipeline of work, but I'll stop there and see if Bill wants to add more to that. It's an ongoing issue for sure. None of those things will solve it.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, Bill, it's just mostly about, how we can improve recruitment, incentives, what's really going to help make that difference on jobs in wildland fire management.
Yeah, that's tough. I know that there's a lot of work and pay equity and pay, provisions that can, make jobs more attractive. Being able to have, housing, like I mentioned at the end of my presentation, it's how buying a house is not reachable for a lot of folks in these jobs anymore, even with 2-income households. And so it's, I think there's a lot of work we have to do so people can have, productive and happy lives, not burning people out. We burned a lot of people out in recent years, and finding ways to address that is going to be important. I'm hearing a lot of conversations about, if Congress doesn't pass these pay provisions that are being discussed right now, that a lot of the federal workforce is planning on walking, and so, I think we really need to look at this on a systems level and address the systems that are creating the problems.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And as we can see, we could go on talking about this all day. And I think the panelists and even the questions have shown how this is such a multifaceted issue. And as Bill just said, you need a systems approach, whether that has to do with workforce, whether that has to do with increasing pace and scale of work on the ground, and also, of course, working with communities and partners to expand work and understanding of all these issues. So with that, again, thank you so much for joining us. And here are all of our emails. So feel free to email anyone that you'd like to follow up with. We're here to help. And if you take anything away from this, I would like to take away that, again, the Forest Climate Working Group is a resource. So feel free to check out the website and reach out and think of us as a place to go for questions such as this. So thanks again, everyone. And we will have the recording available. It'll be sent out to all the registrants and also available on the FCCP website soon. So thank you all again, and a big round of applause to the panelists.
Thank you, Danielle and Sandra.